All right, we're going to get started. Hope everybody is keeping their energy up as the days go on and the day gets longer. Appreciate your time and arriving. For some of you that have been in my other sessions, I thank you. For those that haven't, I'll give you a quick summary because they all kind of built upon one another. So the first session that I did yesterday was kind of a foundational session. And in that session, we really focused on the idea of how do we secure identities, okay? And we're really talking about the identity, not the environment of the identity, but the actual identity, right? So we broke it down into really three different buckets. One is prevent, hygiene, right? Security hygiene. Make sure what you have in place is secure. On-prem AD is 23 years old, okay? Make sure that you go in, dig out all the details, make sure that you are securing what the attacker can enumerate and easily exploit and take advantage of in your environment. Also with that, you have to maintain that level of security. You can't just do an assessment and say, we're done. No, you have to maintain that, in my opinion, 24/7, in real time, because the attackers move quickly, okay? That's the hygiene bucket. 2, because no matter how great your security is, you can still be attacked, you need detections, okay? From a basic detection of a password spray attack all the way in Active Directory to the most robust detections of a golden ticket attack. Anything and everything in between, you need to be able to detect attacks, okay? 3, response. You have to know what you're being told, and you have to have actions to actually respond, okay? I've heard multiple times in different conversations, automation. Okay, that sounds good, right? Sounds great. I'm going to be at 3 o'clock in the morning, something happens, it's just going to automatically fix itself. Yes, I'm going to disable that service account for that particular application that makes $5 million a month. Probably not, okay? So we have to really consider what's going to happen with the automation. So that's kind of the foundation, right? Then we moved on and talked in our last session about some inner workings of Active Directory and Azure Active Directory and what needs to be looked at from a security standpoint. So we drilled down into settings, making sure we knew how to gather the information, what to look for in the information, and how possibly to secure that information, okay? So why is that so important? Well, I think it's so important because of stuff like this, lapsus, okay? Lapsus is a very good example of why we must have both preventative measures and detective measures, okay? Lapsus is interesting because Microsoft was hit with lapsus, right? After being hit, their security team kind of did some forensics and some evaluation and did a write-up. I highly recommend that you go look at the write-up. A lot of great information in it. I kind of pulled out some tidbits, right? First of all, you'll see here, lapsus used DC sync attacks, okay? Interesting about DC sync attacks, right? If you're not familiar with it, DC sync is when the attacker creates a fake domain controller. And that fake domain controller communicates with the real domain controller and asks for the list of users and the password hashes. Now, what level of privilege do you think the attacker would need to have to do a DC sync attack? Well, they need more than read. Thank goodness, right? But they don't need domain admin. They need 2 permissions at the domain level. 2 permissions. That's all they need, okay? It is replicate the database. That's it. What do they get from this? Why does the attacker want this? Well, first of all, they're getting every hash for every user. That's great. But one user in particular, the Kerberos ticketing agent. Okay? Every Active Directory has it. every Active Directory needs it, and if the attacker can get the password for the Kerberos ticketing agent, now they can do whatever they want because they can create the golden ticket. That's why the DC sync attack is so critical here. It doesn't require domain admin, but it gives them so much power to be able to gather that information. So it says here, perform privilege escalation, blah, 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 right? Privilege escalation. Lapsus has been consistently observed to use AD Explorer. Now it gets interesting. Who owns AD Explorer? That would be Microsoft. So the attackers are using an enumeration tool from Microsoft to enumerate Microsoft Active Directory. Okay? Read-only access is needed. That's it. Okay? To enumerate all users and groups, to understand which accounts may have high privileges. So when we look at this example, you can see clearly the attackers are using, honestly, basic type of information to gather everything they need to perform the attack. Well, I was really interested in this because it was related to Microsoft, blah, 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 and there was a lot of details that came out of it. So I decided to look up the details around the attack. And I got lucky. I found, on Quantum is the one I looked up. So Quantum was interesting because, as far as I know, it's still the fastest from entry until deployment, 3 hours and 43 minutes. So on this one, I wanted to determine what were the steps. So you will notice this is the first list of steps. Everything in yellow is related to Windows, a domain controller, or Active Directory. Basic things are going on, right? They're doing an IP config all, right? They're going in and doing an NL test to find out trust relationships, right? They go in and net view all. They're getting domain admins. Basic steps. So when we start talking about basic hygiene, you have to be protecting even at the basic level, because this is a result of 3 hours and 43 minutes someone can get in. And then they continue. Again, everything in yellow is related to Windows, a domain controller, or Active Directory. They didn't use AD Explorer here, they used AD Find. It's just an enumeration tool, right? And then they go in and get information using WMI from the System32 folder. Just gathering information, seeing what they can see, and then finally they walk through the steps, and at the end, they're a domain admin. Okay? Whenever I read, oh, it's a sophisticated nation-state attack. No, it's not. It's a kid in the basement, right? I mean, it doesn't have to be that sophisticated. So when we start looking at settings, we have to make sure that the settings that the attacker can easily access, can easily evaluate what to attack. We have to make sure that those settings are secured. Okay? All right. So you saw this earlier. This is a little bit different view of the graphic I showed you in the last session. This one kind of blows it out into a top and bottom, describing what happens in an attacker process. As I mentioned in the last session, we know exactly what the attackers are going to do. But it's not unclear. We know they're going to enter. We know they're going to get local privileges. We know they're going to install software. They're going to mine credentials. They're going to move laterally, and they're going to escalate privileges. As soon as they get privileges in the enterprise, they're going to create backdoors. They're going to create persistence, which makes your backups invalid because now you're backing up what the attacker put in there. Okay? Now, at each step, we also know what the attacker is going to do. That's the bottom. Okay? So when they're entering, right, phishing, exploiting vulnerabilities, and exploiting misconfigurations. Those are the top three. So we have to make sure that not only is Active Directory secure, make sure that all of your devices that are available to the outside are also secure. Endpoints, servers, applications, services. From the basics, right? And when I say basics, what I mean is you have 20 new computers. You have to image those computers. You image them. Don't use the same local administrator password on all 20. It is the year 2023. We should not be doing that anymore. Okay? And I know some of you still do. It's not a big deal. It's a huge deal, right? If one password can be obtained, they have the password everywhere. Okay? Use LAPS, Local Administrator Password Solution. Buy a third-party solution. I don't care what it is. Take care of the basics. Also, don't give users local administrative access on their machine. Technology's been around literally for 20 years to get around that. So make sure, go research it. There's plenty of vendors that are here that sell that software. Go buy the software where the user can perform local administrative tasks, but they aren't a local administrator, okay? It's really cool technology. But we also not only know what they're going to do, we have ways to secure the issue, right? User education, I just put it up there kind of as a joke, but it's not going to happen, right? Education of users. I was looking at, someone sent me a link the other day and it said something about educating users. I'm like, really? We're still doing that? I mean, we try, but they're users, right? And then we move over, right? Antivirus EDR. Absolutely needed still. We need antivirus. It's not great. EDR, we need it. It's not great. As I told the last group, if you don't believe me, just go search bypass EDR vendor name, and you'll get multiple hits on exactly how to bypass that EDR. But you need it, okay? We still need these things in place. We need technologies, right? Least privilege. We need UBA. Because what's going to happen is as soon as they get access to that device, whatever device that is, they're going to mine the credentials, and they're going to use those credentials to move to the next device. This is the lateral movement piece. So we need to protect at all cost everything that we know the attacker is going to do. So as they move through, we have technologies, we have things that we can put in place to secure against those actions. Usually, when the attacker is successful quickly, we didn't do the right things. We didn't do the basics, right? We must do the basics, right? So what are some settings that I'm going to suggest to you? So we're going to actually kind of recap the last session, and I'm going to give you a summary of the settings that you need to go through. And we're going to actually use my handy-dandy little PowerShell commands to kind of walk through this, okay? I'm going to add some to the last session as well. The first one, users not requiring a password. Please go do this. It's the simplest thing. Just run the command, find the users that don't require a password. Now, you may be thinking, well, Derek, that's kind of retarded. Why would my environment ever have users that didn't require a password? I've seen it multiple times, okay? In my environment, I don't have any. But I guarantee 50% of you in here, your environment has at least one user that doesn't require a password. So how did it get there? You have a third-party tool that is provisioning your users. And when it creates a user, it flips the switch to not require a password. You don't see it on the user account. But it's a quick command to run to get a list of all the users that don't require a password. And the attackers can go through that list, okay? And yes, when the user doesn't require a password, it completely bypasses the password policy, 100%. The password policy can't control a user where the user account is flagged to not require a password, okay? So simple check, go through, make sure that you're looking at these basics, okay? As I told the last group, email me. You have my email address. I'll be more than happy to send you these PowerShell commands. I got a list about like this long that I send out after every session just to give you a starter kit on PowerShell commands, right? Let's go to this one, right? We just talked about this one. This is the Kerberos ticketing agent, KRB TGT. Every single AD has it. Microsoft, about a year and a half ago, recommended that you reset the password every 2 years. After some grief, they've now updated it to every 6 months. Microsoft recommends that you reset the password for this account every 6 months. I've seen environments that haven't had it changed in 22 years. Just run it. Run the command and look to see when that password was changed last, right? So I run the command. Here it tells me password last set was 32523. Excellent. Go through and do the process. This one in particular, when you reset the password, you have to reset it twice because it actually caches the last one. So you have to cycle through and purge the last one. So you have to reset it twice in order to completely reset the password for this account. This is the account that I was talking about with regard to a DC sync attack. This is what the attacker wants. Password, the hash for this account. All right? Next, users with a primary group ID. Not set to 513. 513 is for domain users. Okay? So when I run this, I want to get a list of all users that don't have 513 as their primary group ID, and then I'm going to be able to determine what it's set to. Okay? Maximus is set to 512, which is domain admins. This is a legacy setting, but often, as humans, we need something set. So in the year 2004, oh, I need the setting set. Boom, I make the setting. Time goes by, I no longer need that setting, but I don't change it back to what it needs to be, I just let it go. So I guarantee some of you have users in your environment that have a primary group ID set to a privileged group. The attackers can clearly see what privilege that user has just by looking at the primary group ID. All right? Great way to create persistence too, right? Because how many of your SOC analysts are getting information if the primary group ID changes for a user? I'm going to guess almost none, right? So if I, as the attacker, can create persistence and backdoors that you're not even looking for, excellent. Now I can get back in. Next, users with SPNs, right? Service principal names. SPNs are usually configured for service accounts. So I want to find out users that have SPNs configured. The SPN isn't the problem. The issue is, do these users that have SPNs also have privileges? So now what I can either put it together, splice it together in a PowerShell command, or I'm going to have to manually go through, or I'm going to get something that's going to tell me, right? And all of these things you need to constantly be tracking. You need to constantly be updated if these settings change, right? Unconstrained Kerberos delegation, or even partially constrained Kerberos delegation. Very bad settings. In my opinion, the top two on this list, privileged users with SPNs and unconstrained Kerberos delegations. Both of them can be breached in hours. Hours by a user with read access. Okay? And the result is impersonation, which is very difficult to detect, right? Extremely difficult to detect. Because how in the world do I tell the difference between an account that's supposed to be doing things and the account logged on that isn't supposed to be doing those things. They look like the same. It's just activity, right? So these types of attacks based on these misconfigurations are extremely important. Next, let's go to admin SD holder, okay? This is the account, the object that's responsible for keeping track of every administrative account's ACL. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to expand on this from the last session because this command, the DSACLs, Directory Service Access Control List, is getting me the results for this object. But I'm also going to add to your list, you need to run DSACLs against your organizational units. Okay? Which organizational units? Those that have users and those that have groups. Okay? Why? Because I want you to analyze if someone, could have been 20 years ago, decided to set up delegation for your OUs so someone can perform an action on the objects in those OUs. The reason I pick user OUs, resetting passwords is probably the #1 delegation. 2, for groups, modifying group membership. All right? So, DSACLs, you want to run it against admin SD holder to make sure that whoever is on that list should have access to all of the administrative accounts. And then for your OUs to make sure you are looking at if someone has the ability to reset passwords or modify groups. Okay? It's really the only way. Microsoft does not have reporting on giving you this information, right? The delegation wizard is a set only. It's not a report and it's not a removal. So not only do you need to get the ACL for the object, you now have to go through the groups recursively to make sure which users are in those groups, because group nesting is a real pain. But again, PowerShell with one switch, right? The recursive switch can tell you every user in a group, even if it's nested 10 levels down. So these are some things that you absolutely have to look at a minimum. I encourage you, when you get back, make sure that whoever's responsible for this runs through these commands. You are going to find things that scare you. Hopefully I'm scaring you to go back and do it, and then when you get there, you're going to be scared even more. Because these are very prominent things that you have in Active Directory. And I see them all the time. Absolutely all the time. Okay? You also need to go through your groups, right? So I have here, privileged groups. So you can use PowerShell commands, get the group members recursively. When I talk about privileged groups, yes, I do mean domain admins, enterprise admins, group policy creator, owner, blah, blah, blah. But I also have 2 other categories of groups for you, okay? Those are the default groups. The second category are service and application groups. Those are groups that are created when you install a service or install an application, and that service or application actually creates those groups to administer that application or service. Great example is Exchange, right? It created tons of groups to administer Exchange. So go through and make sure that you are looking at all privileged groups there. And then a third category are custom. Administrators over time have notoriously created groups, right? Named after the 7 dwarfs and Jedis and I don't know, whatever else. Okay? Because they're easier to remember, they're easier to use. So make sure that your custom groups are also included in terms of making sure you know who has membership in them. This is a great way, all of these things that I just showed you, to reduce your attack surface and immediately increase security. Basics. This is hygiene. That's all it is. Once you go through and you secure it, you got to get something in place that's going to verify if any of these things change. Put those in place as well. And you have to have it as real time as possible. Okay? And and here's admin SC holder. So that gives you a list. I gave you a summary of kind of what I went over yesterday. Today, giving you a list of what you need to do, because these settings are what I see as an issue in every Active Directory environment. Okay? So that's my time. I ran through that, but only had 25 minutes. So I appreciate it. I'll be hanging around if you have any questions. Have a great rest of your day. If you're traveling home today or tomorrow, travel safe. Thank you much.